So we had I had a conversation with Dan today. It was really interesting. We covered Gen AI, we covered discovery, we went through legal representation, the fact there aren't enough lawyers in the world. We also had a good discussion about how we could utilize these tools and what you should be really looking out for when you're working with Gen AI and in the discovery field. It's a little bit longer episode, but stick with it. There's some good stuff in there. Today's guest is Dan Rupprecht, who is Managing Director at Sky Discovery, who help make lawyers' lives easier in e-discovery. And we'll be discussing how generative AI could aid service providers and enhance offerings to their clients. I'm Tony Wood from CEO Collaborative Forum, so let's hear CEO Reflects. Hey Dan, how are you?
Hey, Tony. Good. How are you doing today?
You know what? There's a little bit of sunshine here, so I'm very happy. That always makes me a little bit better. And we're talking about generative AI, and we're also talking about e-discovery, which are two topics that I really love and really enjoy. So I don't know where to start. I'd like to know a little bit about you, Dan. How did you get into this area?
Everybody comes from a different angle with a different perspective, and our road to e-discovery and in this field is peppered with very interesting backgrounds and experiences that really provide a lot of nuance to what we do, and really is what excites me about it is a lot of different expertise coming together to solve common issues all around digital interrogation and understanding data. So my story is not unique, but does differ from many. My background is that of a lawyer, and I worked many years within a law firm working on large scale regulatory requests and government investigations, which brought me in contact with and in use of a lot of the technologies that we use today to gain insights into large volumes of data. The more I started to use these tools, the more I started to apply various techniques and advanced technologies to the problems that we were encountering, the more I realized the value as a lawyer, the power that comes from not just knowing what are the true facts, but getting to them quickly. But it was a bit of a sidetrack road to get to where I am. But at the end of the day, it is the cross section between the legal views that I carry, but amplified and augmented through technology and really building upon that marriage of two practices.
Just let me know, because e-discovery may be a new topic for a lot of people. So can you just run down why would someone use an e-discovery firm like yours?
Yeah, most of the time it's usually in conjunction with a live matter within a legal jurisdiction. So it could be anywhere in the world, but most litigations or investigations or even compliancy type of exercises are built around, as any case, around certain facts. And as lawyers, you accumulate those facts to build your arguments, to prove or disprove opposing counsel's ideas, but it's all within this adversarial environment or compliancy environment where we're identifying evidence and disclosing it to either the other side or to the regulators. Now, e-discovery comes into play because where we're looking for these facts, where we're trying to interrogate these digital environments, the data volumes are just so massive and they're growing exponentially year in, year out. So really, it's the proverbial needle in the haystack, where the haystack is growing at a rate that we just can't handle. And as lawyers, we still need to get to those needles. So I often look at e-discovery as an exercise in shrinking haystacks so the lawyers can find their needles a little bit easier.
It's
And we
really
use a
interesting.
variety of various technologies to do that, from simple search term analysis straight through to generative AI tools that we're now seeing coming onto the market.
But how do you know? So you're asking a question. So you're going in with an inquiry because you've got this
Yeah.
massive amount of data, and you're saying, "I want to find something." Is it you're saying, "I'm trying to find something around this topic," or "I'm trying to find something around this time," What's the question that you're asking?
Observation. It requires a multidisciplinary team to go through this exercise in combing the data for what it is that you're after. There is a highly technical aspect to it, which requires sound forensic sort of collection capabilities. We need to be able to identify where these materials might lie. We
Hmm.
have to be able to collect that material in a defensible fashion. So when it does get questioned in court, we can create that evidentiary link between potentially the individual and the evidence that you're trying to prove. And you want to also do it in a way where you're not spoliating that evidence, because a lot of the technologies that we use at the later stages need to rely upon, again, data that hasn't been affected in the identification and collection process. Once we get that into systems, it really becomes a consultancy led approach where we have to work very closely with lawyers to understand what their objectives are,
Right.
really plan out workflows that get them to success in both a reasonable and proportionate way, but also in an efficient and cost effective way. So we find that our consultancy teams are made up of a combination of lawyers who can understand those arguments and really key into the points that we're after, and then data scientists and technology specialists that can drive these systems and really create those efficiencies and make sure that we're getting to the evidence that we're after. Once all of that is pulled together, we call this the EDRM. I'm boring everybody right now, but once
The
we get to
EDRM. No,
yeah,
no, it's an acronym. Okay, what's EDRM?
e-discovery reference model. But once we get to the end of said yellow brick road, we hit the finish line and disclose the documentation that we're either obliged to based on sort of court obligations, or if it's more of a compliancy exercise or investigative exercise, gets us into a position of confidence that we know what's going on and what we need to produce to a regulator. Yeah, any number of different ways that we run through these projects, but at its core, it really is all about shrinking haystacks and finding needles.
So in a way, it's if you're using Bing or Perplexity to search for information, and you search through till you find the information, and then you have a link to the information, and you got it back there. So it's similar to that, but you're doing this on in enterprises that have terabytes, if
Yeah.
not more, of
Yeah.
data. Do you have to copy the data all to your site, or do you work on their systems?
Yeah, so because this is a legal interrogation by nature, going in and acting as a big brother in a proactive manner behind the walls
Yeah.
of most corporations is usually not palatable for the end client. A lot of the information that we need to have access to has to specifically relate to a live matter or a request for information by a government entity to be considered on par within the confines of the general or the GDPR. And so data protection and data privacy is at the core of everything that we do. That's a long way of saying, no, we don't really do our investigations behind the firewalls of the corporation. It's usually an exercise of identifying the likely sources of data that might be at issue, providing the reasons that we would be collecting that and processing that information in accordance with the regulations in place. And then once we've built that universe of potentially relevant documentation, we then apply our technologies to shrink that down, because the starting point is always the impossible from my perspective. We've got millions of documents with a
Dun,
short
dun,
period of
dun,
time to
dun.
get
I
through.
love that.
So how do we achieve the impossible?
Yeah,
And we do
because
that
and
daily.
you're searching through the system. So not only have you got to figure it out, you've also got to look for what might not be there. So you're not only searching for information that's there, you're searching through audit logs, and thank goodness
Yeah.
a lot of systems have solid audit trails that can't be deleted or tampered with. So
Yeah.
you've got to say, would there be something there? There's an audit log that says that it might be. There's a file that should be there and it's not there, or an email's been deleted, or something like that. So as long as they follow ISO, then of course
Yeah.
you've got that trail. And then that must become even more tricky, because then you're suddenly going, not only is the information gone, but they've tried to withhold evidence. Oh, this sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, no, you're keying into a lot of the conversations that we have on every project that we get
Oh,
involved
awesome.
with, and in particular in the very early stages of the matters. I often say that, yeah, with our systems and with our different network environments, there is the ordinary course. The good thing about
Mm,
computers is that there is a sort of standard that's in place, and if you have the forensic background to understand how things should look, we can identify information that might have been manipulated or obfuscated or hidden those environments. So I've often said, and when I consult and advise with corporations, I always say the harder you try and hide evidence, the easier it is for investigators like myself to find them. You're almost shining a flashlight on it because it's not where it
love it.
should be. And we can get to things a little bit easier. So
I re-
don't think that you're smarter than those who are looking, because we're all well trained in finding where things should be and identifying what is in the wrong place.
I love that, and I want to thank the e-discovery experts who've stayed with us this far to explain what you actually do on the day to day. So
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
catching everybody up on this. So now let's get into some more of the detail. Into so how can we make this better? It sounds like there's a lot of tedium in this.
Yeah.
So if you had to pick one area to speed up your daily life, if you had a magic wand and you could go, I want some kind of AI tool that would speed up, which would be the area you would pick?
Yeah, I guess that also requires a little bit of a history in e-discovery, because we have seen some steps going forward in the last decade or more that has really helped us tackle these data volumes, which really is at the core of our business and the pain point that we've experienced all along the way. But the infancy of digital interrogation, we mainly dealt with search term analysis and creating very creative workflows using a series of terms and ideas that might be pulled together that could identify potentially relevant documentation. As the data volume started to increase, these search term analysis approach techniques were just creating an abundance of what we would call false hits and irrelevant review and document review, which really started the impetus and the need to really look into more AI driven or machine learning type technologies that can get us through the data a lot quicker and more efficiently. About 10 years ago, we started to apply quasi AI type tools in machine learning that allowed us for some conceptual analysis, predictive coding, continuous active learning, where we could train systems to think like lawyers. And it was a huge sea change for our industry, in the sense that we could take one attorney and turn them into 10 attorneys, or turn them into 100 attorneys based on decisions that they were making with the data that we were
Mm.
being presented with. And again, it was a huge advantage when the name of the game was understanding and gaining insights from materials that largely contain irrelevant material. But we're now again at a stage where even the best workflows using machine learning and continuous active learning still struggle to create the efficiencies we need when we're being presented with even more data than we were presented with last year or 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. To your question, in terms of a magic wand or a silver bullet, I don't know if there's anything out there quite yet. But generative AI is definitely moving in the right direction in that regard, and we're starting to see real advantages and being able to almost ask questions of large data sets and get answers back in the same way that you can ask questions of large LLMs or chat GPT, where you can actually interact with the information that you're being presented with, even if it is so voluminous that you don't even know where to start.
I think that's a really good point. So what you're saying is you want to use the intelligence or the reasoning of the later models that we have now, but with the data that you have. So it's in context and maybe RAG or fine tuning or something like that. So that sounds relatively simple to implement. What are the problems that you've seen? Because it sounds like that seems like a no-brainer to do. What's stopping people from doing that?
Well, I mean, there's still a myriad of issues that go along with it, especially when you're talking about a litigation or
Yeah.
something that finds itself in a legal proceeding. We have to be very mindful over what we're using data for, how we're interacting with that data, how it's being processed and exposed to other sorts of technologies that are out there, with the understanding that personally identifiable information and data protection is at the core of everything that we do.
Yeah.
So I think because we're in the sort of early stages of generative AI and the applications that we're able to build off of it, we're being very tentative in terms of how do we deploy it. We work very closely with our clients. We work
Hmm.
very closely with our legal teams to make sure that everything that we're doing from a data interrogation perspective is also being very mindful of the legal ramifications off the back of that. Again, emphasizing what I had mentioned earlier around making sure there's a multidisciplinary team in place that even if we can do it
Yeah.
technically, should we do it legally? And really, those things need to be completely aligned in order to move forward. So that being said, I think in the litigation space, we're a little bit more tentative, although we're kicking the tires where we can. In the investigative space, where it's more about finding something rather than looking through everything, we're testing these tools out a little bit more openly because again it's not as detrimental from a regulatory standpoint. We're really just testing out and seeing what we find without having any real sort of end goal. It's just about, is there anything happening and should it be seen, or is it prevalent within our data sets?
So it's making sure that everything is secure, making sure that
Yep.
you're compliant along the way. So it sounds like if there were a tool that could help you remain compliant, I just imagine, I love what you were talking about where you've got one lawyer you were talking about in already in the history of your industry, you're multiplying individuals by using AI and machine learning. I really like the concept of, so you've got your agents or agentic employees, as it were, and
Yep.
your lawyers are shepherding them. They're digital twins. So what they're
Yeah.
able to do is they're able to sit there and say, okay, I want to deploy 20 of you or 1,000 of you. So you're deploying intelligence rather than deploying a tool, which means you can scale up the run drum, the stuff that's not very interesting, not very,
Yeah.
that people find problems with. 8 hours of looking at a whole bunch of documents, we're going to make mistakes. But the rule set for a lot of these, the simple things, as long as they have the oversight, they can start to help look for these issues. Is that something, how quickly do you think that will be deployed in your industry? Because it means you could scale up way
Yeah.
faster than your competition. This sounds
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
The Sky Discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is my favorite time. I had mentioned in the brief history lesson about a decade ago when we first got exposed to predictive coding and then a little bit later
Mm,
continuous active learning. From my perspective and as a consultant who advises on these types of matters, it was the most exciting time because we were going through that phase of trial and error. I was working on some pretty large investigations at the time, and we were really able to push the limits of the technology in ways that were very creative and really putting us at the forefront of what can be done with these tools. Things got quiet for a little while, but we're back there again. And I can't emphasize how excited I am about this because I do remember those days
yeah.
and all the frustrations that we get from large volumes of data, the endless nights of saying, oh, I wish we could do this, I wish we could do that. We're now at a point where we can start saying that again with a tool that can potentially deliver. So I would say that right now we're in that trial and error phase that I love so
Mhm.
much. We at Sky Discovery are blessed and are happy to have on our team a number of developers that are really
Awesome.
trying to push
Love.
these tools in different ways, and we're not scared to use them. We're not waiting to see, oh, okay, is this the perfect scenario? We're working with clients, listening to their problems and deploying them already on cases. And this is something that I really think is important because it's when you start deploying these technologies and understanding its limitations that we can really then start to push where it does work correctly and where it is creating those efficiencies again in time and cost. Again, a long way of saying I think we're there now in terms of being able to use these tools, but in terms of acceptance and really being a big part of e-discovery and just a standard way of doing the work. I think we're still a little bit away. I think probably 2 to 5 years before we see this as prevalent as what we're seeing some of the machine learning tools. The
So,
reason,
so that
oh, sorry.
means, sorry, no, I was going to say, so that means that you've got the experience of how you rolled these tools out over the last decade, and so
Yeah,
now you're able to use that same experience to roll out these new tools until they then become an
yeah,
intelligence in their own right, to be able to reason, I think is the right term, to reason in
yeah.
their own right on those issues rather than intelligence.
100%. It's a little bit of a crystal ball because we've gone through it
Mhm.
before, but then we also understand that at the end of the day, we are confined to the regulations and the rules of the court and the evidentiary audit trail that is necessary in terms of presenting
Yeah,
particular facts in court. And so we're somewhat constrained by what is accepted by the various legal systems. And some jurisdictions might adopt sooner than others. Once we start building a precedent around the acceptability of these tools in a courtroom proceeding, we will start to see the adoption grow pretty quickly. And it's generative AI at the end of the day. So everything seems to be in super fast forward. So I don't think it will take as long as predictive coding and the others. But at the end of the day, it is something that we have to ensure if we are relying upon this in these very sensitive matters. We have to make sure that we're getting the right facts, that we're using technology in a meaningful way, but also that we're using them within the various jurisdictional constraints that we place on data because it is so powerful.
I want to ask you one other question before I move on to just what one piece of advice you'd give our listeners. Okay,
Yeah.
so I was thinking as I was prepping for this call, there's going to be some black hat e-discovery firms out there that are trying to stop you from doing what you're doing. Is that a thing? Did I just make that up? Are there like you? Oh, I've got trouble. I'm going to hire this company. I don't know, the Darth Vader version of Sky Discovery that's
Yeah.
there trying to stop you from finding the information. Is that a thing, or have I just had way too much coffee this morning?
No, I don't know if it's necessarily a thing in the way that you described in terms of the dark side of Sky Discovery. I think that there are various sandboxes that are at play in the field that I work in, and to assume that every company is offering the same or similar deliverables is a bit of an incorrect statement because there are certain areas where getting human eyes on documents and doing certain things a certain way benefit that particular type of matter and get to end goals that differ based on other situational circumstances that might require a different strategy. So where Sky Discovery sits is very much in the consultative realm where very complex problems require very sort of unique technological workflows and approaches that essentially rely upon a team that is thinking a bit outside of the box. And we rely very heavily on how do we get the best out of the tools that we are presented with and move forward from there. Now, is that the best solution for other projects? That's for
Mhm.
other companies to figure out. What I can say is that in the cases that we get employed on in my career, the types of investigative data insights that we're after require not a one size fits all process. It is very much a investigatory approach that utilizes all the various tools that we have at our disposal. So I think when you start looking at a consultancy like our own, it's with the view that we have a problem, we're not really sure what the solution is, we've got way too much information that we have to get through with a time frame that's virtually impossible, and our only answer is technology. Who do we go to? It requires a little bit of a partnership rather than a one size fits all solution. So I think that's where the balance comes in. We could use a hammer versus scalpel analogy, any number of different big company versus small company, that kind of analysis. But at the end of the day, there's the right company for the problem that you're on, and those vary from case to case.
But it
And
sounds like
that's,
you can. Yeah, it sounds like you can scale up using generative AI. You can scale up
yeah,
like really quickly. If your team can shepherd to as easily as 50 or 100 like agentic searches for
yeah.
information, it sounds like you can scale up from that perspective. This sounds really interesting for the future. I've one question for you. What one piece of advice would you give to someone when thinking about the topic of e-discovery and going, oh, I need it? When's that? Oh, I need to have that. When would they go, ah, I need to have that?
I think we benefit in my industry from working in an age where data is essential on any case that we're working on. I don't think that there's a single lawyer out there who doesn't recognize the absolute need for e-discovery solutions on the matters that they're working on, because that's where their evidence is. And really, the conundrum begins when we start analyzing how much of that data could be at issue. And again, to go back to what I said earlier, if your starting point is the impossible, really the only solution then becomes, okay, what technologies are now at hand that can get me to a reasonable and proportionate end to the problem that I'm now dealing with. And so my recommendation for any lawyer isn't really around should or shouldn't I use e-discovery. It's how do I need to deploy that? And in that area, I do encourage all lawyers to really understand what each of these technologies has to offer and really tune up on when and where it is best applied. I'm a lawyer by trade. We didn't get this type of information in our law schools. I think that's changing. I think the law schools are starting to really create avenues of education for young lawyers to really grasp these technologies. But whenever I speak to law firms and our clients, and I get the opportunity to speak to young lawyers, I always advise them to say, hey, if you want to make an impact in your firm, take on technology, because getting to the facts quickly is going to put you in a position that's invaluable within your firm, and you will become a key player on any litigation team just because you know how to get to those facts quicker. It worked for
That's a
me.
Yeah,
And
that's a
so,
really
yeah.
good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Is there a risk that by having a lot of the lower skilled jobs being done by AI reasoning engines in some way,
Yeah.
that younger lawyers or inexperienced lawyers won't get the experience they need because they won't be able to, and you'll just end up with just very senior lawyers and then none? How I don't think it's that much of an issue because I think we need more. Probably, I think we need
Go
more
ahead,
lawyers
say it.
because
We need more
we,
lawyers.
we do need more lawyers because I think a lot of people don't feel they have access to legal representation, and so therefore, if we can scale up, do you think there's a way that younger lawyers and more inexperienced lawyers could skip that drudgery stage and go straight to strategy? They like shadow you or they join you in some of the meetings. Is that starting to change for you?
Yeah, there is absolutely no doubt that this is going to change the legal field and how we operate in it. Do I have concerns that computers will be taking the jobs of young lawyers? Absolutely not. I remember sitting in the law firm many years ago when I first got introduced to predictive coding, and there was just a few of us who were leading teams in the belly of the beast, and we basically started looking at each other, some young lawyers saying, oh, that was fun while we had it. Let's go look for something else. The computers are taking over. And what started, yeah, basically the day after was an influx of more work than we have ever seen, and a growth in the industry that has been unparalleled. Will it change the way we work? Absolutely. But you make a really good point. Access to justice is not something that should be overlooked. We don't get to the cases that we can get to, mostly because of time constraints and the fact that, yeah, to your point, we don't have enough lawyers. So
All
to
the
be
lawyers, I
able,
can actually hear them cheering right now.
yeah, yeah. And also, I also look at technology as an opportunity to remove a lot of the noise. And so a lot of the work that lawyers are being presented with, unfortunately, especially the young lawyers in the early stages of their career, they're getting presented with a lot of irrelevant material that they need to get through. If we can clear that away, then they can get to more material that's substantive. They can get exposure to information and start really contributing to a strategy in a meaningful way. So I actually think that lawyers who are deploying and adopting these types of technologies are just going to be the lawyers that everybody is after. If your job is to review and go through irrelevant material, and that is your job as a lawyer, I think that you'd have some concern about what's to come. But my view is that a lawyer utilizing these tools is going to get to more. is going to have access to substantive material that will better prepare them for the cases they're trying to bring. And those young lawyers will be getting more involved at the earlier stages, and that learning curve will go straight up. Again, I think it's a great time to be a lawyer with tech.
This sounds like a really great, bright future and a perfect place to leave it. Dan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Tony. Really appreciate it.